At my husband's funeral, they all left me sit alone on one side. Not one of them looked at me, not David, not Claire, not even Rebecca, who used to call me Mom when she needed help paying for school. I sat there with my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the cheap fabric of the black dress I'd ironed that morning stick to the back of my knees from the humidity. I wore it because Charles liked how I looked in it, said it made me look elegant. Not that it mattered to anyone there. The church wasn't full, but they still filled the front rows, all lined up like they had earned their places through loyalty and love. But they hadn't. They hadn't been around during the chemo appointments, the nights when Charles couldn't hold down soup, or the mornings he forgot what year it was. They showed up at the very end, when it was convenient, when they could pose as grieving children and receive sympathy from distant cousins who didn't know any better. I had arrived first, sat near the front, quietly. I thought at least one of them would join me. Instead, I heard the shuffle of heels and dress shoes behind me as they sat together, far enough to make a statement, close enough to be seen. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that if I started, I wouldn't stop. I could feel it building, an ache behind my eyes, a tightness in my chest. But I held it in. I had to. They didn't acknowledge me during the service. Not once. Even when the pastor read the eulogy, one I wrote, they didn't glance my way. David even had the nerve to whisper something to Claire and chuckle, just as Charles's name was spoken. I clenched my hands tighter and bit the inside of my cheek. I had spent 28 years married to that man. I was the one who bathed him when he couldn't stand, who cut his food into tiny bites so he wouldn't choke. I was the one who slept in a chair next to his hospital bed. And yet, I was the outsider in that room. When the service ended, people came over to them first. Hugs, condolences, offers of casseroles. And I, Charles's wife, sat there unnoticed. I waited a few minutes. I watched Claire pretend to cry into a tissue she hadn't used once. I saw Rebecca pose for a picture with some second cousin like it was a wedding, not a funeral. David was already talking to the estate lawyer. That's when I stood up. Quietly, I picked up my purse, adjusted my coat, and walked out through the side door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait to be seen. I didn't make a scene. But I made sure to take one thing with me as I left: the manila envelope tucked into the bottom of my purse. Inside was the real will. The one Charles signed 6 weeks before he died, when he could still write his name clearly, when he was lucid and sober. The one none of them knew existed. The original will, the one everyone expected to hear about, left everything to them. That version had been drafted over a decade ago, back when Charles still believed his children would be there for him. Before Claire stole money from his business. Before David told him he didn't want anything to do with him unless there was a check involved. Before Rebecca skipped 4 Christmases in a row but showed up with a camera when she thought it was Charles's last one. The new will didn't leave them with nothing, but it made things clear. The house, the savings, the lake property, all of it was left to me. Not because I asked, not because I pressured, but because Charles said I was the only one who showed up. He wrote it in his own hand on the last page. To my wife, Margaret, who never left my side, not once. Everything I still have is hers. She's the only one who ever earned it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after leaving the church. I watched them through the window, laughing, hugging, already making plans. David was probably already thinking about how to divide the estate. Claire would want the condo. Rebecca would ask for the jewelry. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. I started the car, drove straight to the attorney's office, and placed the envelope on her desk. I'm ready, I told her. She looked at the seal. You sure you want to file this? Yes, I said. Let them be surprised. They didn't see me at the funeral. Maybe now they'll notice. The next morning, my phone started ringing just after 9 a.m. First it was Claire, then David, then Rebecca. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the texts. They started nice, confused, but polite. Hi Margaret, just checking in. We'd like to talk about Dad's estate. Then they got sharper. We need to discuss what you did. Then cruel. You manipulated a sick man. You should be ashamed. I turned the phone off and put it in the drawer. That afternoon, a deliveryman dropped off a large envelope. Inside was a letter from their attorney. They were contesting the will. Of course they were. My lawyer called me an hour later. They want mediation, want to avoid a full probate fight. I told them no. Good, I said. Let them fight. I've got everything I need. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked. I looked out the window, watching the wind move through the trees. Charles used to sit on the porch and listen to that sound. Said it helped him think. He was the only one who ever truly knew how much I carried in silence. Yes, I said. Let's begin. The day after the funeral, I didn't leave the house. I made coffee, but I didn't drink it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty sugar bowl and the old mug Charles always used. It still had the faded green paint on the handle, chipped where he once dropped it back in 2009. I remember that moment clearly. He cursed under his breath and then laughed, saying it added character. I never replaced it. Around 10 a.m., I heard the sound of tires in the driveway, then doors slamming, voices. I looked through the window and saw David and Claire stepping out of a black SUV, both dressed in casual clothes, both carrying Starbucks cups like they were going shopping, not showing up at the home where their father had died less than a week ago. Rebecca wasn't with them. I figured she'd wait until things were sorted before making an appearance. I didn't open the door. I didn't have to. David used his own key. He walked in like he owned the place, glancing around the hallway and muttering something under his breath. Claire followed close behind, pulling off her sunglasses. "Margaret," Claire called out like she wasn't sure I still lived there. I stayed seated. I didn't move. Eventually, David found me in the kitchen. "Oh," he said, pausing in the doorway. "You're here." "Obviously," I replied. He cleared his throat. "Well, we figured it was best to get started. We need to go through Dad's things. You know, sort everything out, make a list." Claire stepped in behind him. "Yeah, we just thought it made sense to begin with the office. That's where the important documents are." They didn't ask. They didn't say hello. They didn't even pretend to check on me. Just straight to the business of dividing things up like it was a yard sale. I stood up slowly. "Did you talk to your attorney?" David gave a tight smile. "We have, but we're not worried. We have the original will, the one Dad signed years ago. And you're sure he didn't update it?" Claire rolled her eyes. "We would have known. He wasn't in any condition to make changes, Margaret. Not in the last year." She looked so sure, so smug. "Interesting," I said, "because 6 weeks before he passed, your father had a meeting with our attorney. I was there. He signed a new version." David's smile vanished. "What? You heard me. Where is it?" "Already filed." Claire set her coffee down hard on the counter. "You mean to tell us that Dad rewrote the will without telling any of us? And left it with you?" "He didn't need to tell you anything," I said. "He had full mental capacity. He wasn't pressured. It was his decision." "That's ridiculous," David snapped. "He was sick. You took advantage." I shook my head. "You didn't visit him for months. You didn't call. You didn't even show up when he went into the hospital the last time. You're going to stand in my kitchen and accuse me of something you were too absent to even witness?" Claire turned red. "You always wanted everything for yourself. I wanted him to be treated like a human being, that's all." David took a deep breath, like he was trying to keep control. "This isn't over, Margaret. You might think you've got everything locked in, but we'll see about that." He walked past me into Charles's office, ignoring me completely now. Claire followed. I didn't stop them. I sat back down and waited. They went through every drawer, every cabinet. I heard them flipping through papers, opening boxes, muttering under their breath. Half an hour later, David came back out holding a stack of folders. "I assume you already looked through all this," he said, voice bitter. "Every page," I replied, "and made copies. My lawyer has the full record. You've been planning this for a while." "No," I said. "Charles planned it. I just carried it out." They left without another word. Claire didn't even close the door behind her. Later that afternoon, Rebecca called. "I heard from David," she said. "Is it true?" "What part? That Dad changed the will?" "Yes." "Why?" I almost laughed. "You're really asking that?" "I was going to come visit," she said defensively. "For years ago?" There was silence on the line. "You know," she finally said, "he never told me he was angry. He didn't need to. You didn't show up. You think you're better than us?" "No," I said. "I just stayed." She hung up. 2 days later, I got a formal notice. The 3 of them were contesting the will. The claim? That Charles was mentally unfit when he signed it. That I had isolated him. That I had restricted their access. They even found 2 witnesses, people I barely knew, who were willing to say Charles seemed confused in his final months. I brought the documents to my lawyer, Deborah. She wasn't surprised. "They'll try to drag this out," she said. "It's a tactic. They're hoping you'll give up." "I'm not giving up." She nodded. "Good, because we've got video testimony, signed documents, handwritten notes from Charles himself. This isn't just a solid case, it's bulletproof." That night, I sat alone in the living room. Charles's chair was still there, his blanket folded on the back. I picked up one of his old notebooks and flipped through it. On one page, near the end, he had scribbled a sentence over and over again: "Let her have peace. She earned it." That's all I needed. The war had just begun, but I wasn't going to lose. 2 weeks after the formal notice arrived, the tone of the phone calls changed. They went from threats to fake concern. Claire started calling daily, leaving voicemails that always began the same way. "Hi Margaret, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." She never once asked how I was doing during Charles's illness, but now, suddenly, she wanted updates. I stopped listening after the second message. David's approach was different. He sent emails, long ones. He'd attach old photos of Charles with the kids, reminding me of family bonds and memories we all shared. One even included a scanned copy of a Father's Day card from 1993. At the bottom, he wrote, "He was our dad too, not just your husband. Try to remember that." I didn't respond. Rebecca didn't reach out, but she posted on social media a photo of Charles from 10 years ago, standing in front of the lake house. The caption read, "Miss you every day, Dad. I wish I had more time with you before everything got complicated." I read the comments, people offering condolences, calling her so strong, asking what happened. She didn't reply directly, but one comment stood out. It was from one of her friends. "I heard the will was contested. Sounds like something shady went down. Hope you guys get what's rightfully yours." I took a screenshot and sent it to Deborah. She replied within minutes, "Good, we'll use this." While they ran their mouths, I stayed quiet. That was the difference. They wanted noise, drama, attention. I wanted results, and I already had most of them. Deborah arranged for us to meet with the probate judge for a preliminary hearing. The goal was to present our side, show the updated documentation, and argue that the contestation was frivolous. If the judge agreed, it would cut the whole process down to a few weeks. If not, we'd be looking at months of back and forth. I arrived early, wearing the same coat I wore to Charles's last doctor appointment. I don't know why. Maybe it made me feel close to him. Maybe it just gave me something to hold on to. Deborah met me on the courthouse steps. "They're inside," she said. "All three of them. They brought a different lawyer, someone new." I didn't ask questions. I just nodded. When we entered the room, David was already seated at the long table, looking over a binder like he was the one being deposed. Claire sat beside him, flipping through her phone. Rebecca sat farthest from me, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. Their new lawyer was a woman named Denise Roth. She looked young, mid-30s, maybe, polished. Her blazer probably cost more than my mortgage payment. The judge, an older man named Griffith, entered and called the room to order. He didn't smile. He didn't ask how anyone was doing. He simply asked both sides to present their positions. Deborah stood first. "Your Honor, we've submitted the updated will dated 6 weeks before Mr. Charles Lively's passing. The document is signed, notarized, and witnessed by 2 professionals, a nurse and a financial advisor, both present during the signing. We also have video footage of the signing, which confirms Mr. Lively's full awareness and understanding of the changes." She paused, then added, "Furthermore, we have handwritten letters and notes from Mr. Lively explaining the reasons for the change, which Your Honor has in the submitted file." Judge Griffith looked through the papers in front of him, nodding. Then it was Denise Roth's turn. "Your Honor, we believe the new will was signed under undue influence. My clients were denied reasonable access to their father in his final months. They were intentionally left out of key decisions, and there is reason to believe Mr. Lively's mental state was impaired at the time of the signing. We would like to request a full review of the medical records and an opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses who were present during the document's execution." It was predictable, expected, but I still felt something twist in my stomach when she used the word influence. They really believed that I tricked him, that I somehow coerced a dying man into rewriting his legacy while he sat in a recliner, too weak to hold a pen without help. But I knew the truth. Charles initiated the change. He brought it up first. He said, "I want to make sure you're protected. I don't want them coming in here when I'm gone and treating you like a squatter in your own house." The judge looked at both sides and said he'd issue a preliminary ruling within a week. Until then, no assets would be moved, no properties sold. Everything would stay as it was. Outside, Deborah turned to me. "They're bluffing," she said. "They don't have anything." I believed her, but it didn't make it easier. Later that night, I found a voicemail from Claire. It was short. "This is what you want? To drag all of us through court? To ruin your husband's memory by making it all about money? He's probably rolling in his grave." I deleted it. Then I opened the drawer in the living room, the one Charles had labeled private and kept locked for years. After his death, I found the key inside a pair of his old shoes. Inside the drawer were folders, labeled, dated, color-coded. Charles's handwriting was everywhere. Notes, receipts, messages to himself. He had documented everything: when they visited, when they didn't, what they said, how they made him feel. There was even a note from a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. Claire had shown up late, drunk, and made a comment about how I must be getting tired of being a nursemaid. Charles had written, "She sees me as a burden. Margaret doesn't. That's the difference." I didn't cry when I read that. I just sat there with the folder in my lap and let the silence settle around me. They could lie in court, they could pretend they were loving children, but Charles knew the truth, and I had it in writing. The next morning, Deborah called. The judge had ruled. He denied their request for an extended probate. The will would be honored. A final hearing would be scheduled to close the estate within 30 days. They had lost, but I knew they wouldn't walk away quietly, and I was right. That same afternoon, I saw a black car pull into the driveway. I didn't open the door. I didn't move from the window. I watched Claire get out, look toward the house, and then leave a thick envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a letter. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. They wanted the lake house. They offered to let me keep the main home if I agreed to give up the vacation property. I folded the letter and put it in the trash. Charles once told me, they see things as transactions. You see things as commitments. That's why they'll never understand you. And now, they never would. They lost the case, but that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something else. The morning of the final hearing arrived quietly. It wasn't raining, and the sun wasn't shining either. The sky just hung gray and still, like it was holding its breath. I woke up early, not because I needed to, but because my body wouldn't let me rest. I made oatmeal, but left it untouched on the table. My appetite had been gone for weeks. I pulled the envelope from the kitchen drawer one last time before leaving. Inside was Charles's final letter, the one he had written 3 days before the will was signed. It wasn't long, just 4 short paragraphs, handwritten with effort, each word shaped like he was fighting to stay steady. I carried that letter in my purse to the courthouse. David, Claire, and Rebecca arrived together. They looked like they had coordinated, each in gray, black, and beige. Claire had her hair pulled tight, her lipstick darker than usual. Rebecca wore sunglasses, even indoors. David walked with his jaw clenched and his phone in his hand, probably rereading whatever notes he thought would help him rewrite the past. I didn't say anything to them. I sat down with Deborah in the same courtroom we had been in weeks earlier. The same judge, the same clerk, the same silence before the hearing started. The only thing that had changed was what we now knew, and what they still didn't. When Judge Griffith entered, the room straightened. He adjusted his glasses and opened the file in front of him. Then he looked up at all of us. I've reviewed the testimony, the witness statements, the medical records, and the video documentation submitted. There is no evidence of mental incapacity or coercion. The will signed by Mr. Charles Lively on August 12 stands as the valid final testament. The assets are to be distributed according to that document. This case is now closed. The words landed like a door slamming shut. Claire inhaled sharply. Rebecca whispered something to David, who was already shaking his head. Their attorney leaned in to say something, but no one moved. No one said a word, until I did. Your Honor, I said, standing slowly. If I may, I have something I'd like to place on the record. He paused. Go ahead, Mrs. Lively. I reached into my purse and unfolded the letter. My hands weren't shaking, not even a little. This was written by Charles on August 9th. 3 days before the will was updated. I'd like to read it aloud. I looked at the judge for approval. He nodded once. I began reading. To anyone who questions my decision, let me make this simple. I chose Margaret because she chose me, again and again, even when she didn't have to. David, Claire, Rebecca, you are my children. I love you in the way a father tries to. But I've watched you come and go when it suited you. I've watched you leave her to carry everything alone. You didn't see the days she fed me, cleaned me, lifted me out of bed. You didn't see the nights she stayed awake just to make sure I was still breathing. You didn't hear her argue with doctors to give me more time, more comfort, more dignity. You may not understand this now, but my decision wasn't about money. It was about recognition. I'm giving Margaret what she already earned, what you never even asked how to share in. This isn't punishment, it's justice. The room stayed silent after I finished. No one moved. Claire's lips were parted, but she said nothing. Rebecca looked at the floor. David stood perfectly still. The judge cleared his throat. That letter is admissible and will be entered into the record. Thank you, Mrs. Lively. I folded it neatly and placed it back in my purse. Outside the courtroom, David caught up with me at the elevator. You made him write that, he said quietly. You pushed him. I looked at him. You weren't there, I said. So don't pretend you know anything about what that man went through, or who stood next to him when you didn't. Claire came up behind him. You've ruined this family. No, Iraplia. You did that yourselves. I just stopped letting you pretend otherwise. Rebecca didn't speak. She stood by the entrance, watching us like she was seeing something unfamiliar. She didn't follow them when they walked away. Back home, I closed the front door and locked it. I leaned against it for a moment, listening to the ticking clock in the hallway. Then I walked into Charles's office. I stood in front of the glass cabinet, the one he had always kept locked. I unlocked it now, for the first time since he passed. Inside were boxes of photos, some old fishing gear, a stack of notebooks, and one envelope with my name on it. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of us at the lake house. I was younger, maybe 50. Charles had his arm around me. We were both smiling. On the back, he had written, "This was the day I knew you were my real home." I didn't cry. I just placed the photo back in the envelope and returned it to the drawer. The phone rang later that evening. I let it ring, then checked the voicemail. It was Rebecca. "Margaret, I didn't know about the letter. I didn't know he felt that way. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry." I didn't call her back. Not yet. Instead, I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, this time with an appetite. The oatmeal was still there from the morning, cold and untouched. I dumped it in the trash and started over. I knew the war wasn't over, but I had won the first and most important battle, and that was enough for now. The ruling didn't silence them. It only made them more bitter. For a few days, I heard nothing. The house was quiet, and I used that time to settle the documents, make copies of the judge's ruling, and close Charles's personal accounts. I also took his name off the deed to the house. It was mine now, officially. No more joint property, no more waiting, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they came back. It started with the letter from David, a certified envelope, hand-delivered, with a typed message that didn't even bother with a greeting. "You may think the legal system is on your side, but this isn't over. You've made things harder than they needed to be. We're appealing. You'll hear from our new attorney shortly." I placed the letter back in the envelope, opened my filing cabinet, and slid it into a folder labeled Threats. That same evening, Claire called. I didn't answer. The voicemail came in under a minute later. Her voice was tight, controlled, but not calm. "Margaret, I hope you're happy. I don't know what game you're playing, but you've turned Dad's death into a circus. And just so you know, the whole family's talking. You think you won, but everyone sees what you've done. You'll be remembered for this. Not him, you." I deleted the message. 2 days later, a car pulled into the driveway. I was in the backyard, pulling weeds near the edge of the garden when I heard the tires on gravel. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, and walked to the side gate. It was Rebecca. She stood near the mailbox, holding something in her hand, a manila folder. She didn't come closer. When she saw me, she hesitated, then held up the folder. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just wanted to give you this." "What is it?" She stepped forward slowly. "It's photos of Dad. Some of us. I thought maybe you'd want them." I didn't move. "Why now?" Rebecca looked down at the ground. "Because I didn't know about the letter, the one you read in court. I wasn't lying when I said that. I didn't know how he felt. I thought he still saw us as his kids. I didn't realize how much we had failed him." I took the folder, but I didn't say thank you. She waited a second longer, then added, "David's going to keep pushing this. So is Claire. They're angry. They're not thinking straight. I just wanted to let you know that whatever happens next, it's not from me." I nodded once. She left. Inside the folder were exactly what she said, photos. Some old, some recent. One of Charles with Rebecca at the lake, from maybe 7 or 8 years ago. One of all 3 kids with him on his birthday, a long time ago. Then one I hadn't seen before, Charles and me, sitting together at the kitchen table, both holding mugs. It must have been taken by Rebecca or Claire during one of their rare visits. We looked tired, but we looked like we belonged together. I placed the photo on the fridge with a magnet. That night, Deborah called. They filed the appeal. Of course they did. They're claiming procedural errors in the previous hearing. Nothing specific, just vague enough to trigger a review. It'll take a few weeks for the court to decide if it's worth looking at. I sighed. What are the chances it sticks? Low, but not zero. I'll handle the paperwork. In the meantime, they can't touch anything. Good, I said. Let them spin their wheels. But it wasn't just the legal actions that followed. It was the personal ones. Claire sent an email to Charles's cousins, people I barely knew. In it, she described me as uncooperative, withholding family property, and deliberately keeping the family apart during a time when we should be grieving together. She wrote, "I've tried to reason with Margaret, but she's turned cold. She's using the court ruling to punish us. Dad would have wanted unity, not division." One of the cousins forwarded it to me with a short note. "I don't know what's really going on, but I thought you should see this." I didn't reply. I just added the email to the same folder. By the end of the week, I started getting mail addressed to the estate of Charles Lively, with invoices for things I hadn't ordered. Landscaping, a subscription to a wine club he never joined. It was minor, nothing dangerous, but it was noise. I knew what they were doing. They couldn't win in court, so they'd try to bury me in distractions. But what they didn't understand was that I had been through worse. I had already lived the hard part, watching Charles fade, fighting with nurses, staying up every night because I was afraid I'd wake up and find him gone. I had already carried that weight. These games? These threats? They were nothing in comparison. I focused on what mattered. I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. I updated all the insurance records. I met with a local accountant who helped me transfer Charles's retirement savings into a trust in my name. Quiet steps, protective ones. Deborah called again. Good news. The appeal has been rejected. No grounds for further review. The estate is officially closed. I thanked her and hung up. I sat on the porch for a long time that evening, the final papers in a folder on my lap, untouched. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Around 7 p.m., the phone rang. It was Claire. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief this time. You think this is over, but people don't forget, Margaret. Just remember that. I didn't even bother deleting it. The next morning, I changed the locks on the front and back doors. I ordered a new mailbox with a lock. I opened a new P.O. box downtown. Then I did something I had been putting off. I took Charles's old flannel jacket, the one he always wore during winter mornings on the porch, and folded it carefully. I placed it in a storage bag, sealed it, and put it in the cedar chest in the bedroom closet. I wasn't ready to throw it out, but I didn't need to see it every day anymore. I wasn't trying to erase him. I was making room for what was next. 3 weeks passed with no more calls, no more letters, no new legal threats. For the first time in months, I was able to go to sleep without checking my phone before bed. The silence that used to sting had turned into something I could stand, something I even started to prefer. I began cleaning the house, not out of grief, but because it needed to be mine again. The living room still looked like Charles lived there. The recliner, the stack of medical books he used to pretend to read, the wool blanket folded exactly the way he liked. I kept the blanket. I donated the rest. It wasn't easy. The first day I tried to move his recliner, I just stood in front of it for 10 minutes, staring at the worn armrest where his fingers always rested. But eventually, I grabbed both sides, pulled it away from the wall, and dragged it to the garage. I covered it with a sheet and closed the door. It was still his, but it didn't need to be in the middle of the house anymore. I replaced it with a reading chair. New, firm, with armrests that hadn't yet learned the shape of anyone's hands. After that, it got easier. I changed the curtains. I donated the extra dishes Charles's mother had passed down but that none of us ever used. I boxed up the Christmas ornaments labeled Lively Family, the ones David used to insist we keep for tradition. I wrote a note on the box, "Tradition is earned." Then I taped it shut and left it in the donation bin. I wasn't bitter. I was just making space. The day the new deed arrived, I didn't frame it or celebrate. I put it in the file cabinet behind the Trust tab. Then I opened a fresh manila folder and wrote on the label, Final. It was done. A week later, I went to the lake house. I hadn't been there since before Charles died. He used to love that place. He'd sit on the back deck in a sweatshirt and drink coffee while watching the sun hit the water. Even in the final months, he'd talk about it like he still planned to go one more time. When I arrived, the air was colder than I remembered, but the view hadn't changed. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything was dusty, but untouched. No one had dared come here, not even David. I knew he wanted it, had probably assumed it would be his, but the court had ruled otherwise. And now, so had I. I opened the windows, let the air move through. Then I sat at the same wooden table we used to eat lunch on every summer. I brought a box of Charles's papers with me, things I hadn't looked at yet. I spent the whole afternoon sorting them. His old tax records, notes on a short story he never finished, and a letter he had started writing to his brother before the diagnosis. Halfway through the pile, I found a photo. It was me, standing on the dock, laughing, with the wind blowing my hair back. On the back, Charles had written, "This is what love looks like." I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't cry. That evening, I made tea and sat out on the deck. The wind was sharp, but I didn't mind. The lake was still. I thought about how far things had gone, from being treated like a ghost at Charles's funeral to sitting here now, quietly, in a home they all tried to take from me. They never called again. Not David, not Claire. Rebecca sent a single letter, handwritten, apologizing for not being there when it mattered. I didn't reply, but I didn't tear it up either. I kept it in the back of the same drawer where I kept Charles's old wallet. Some things didn't need answers, just acknowledgement. The following weekend, I hosted a small lunch at the lake house, just 4 friends, women I met at Charles's appointments, or in the waiting room during his rehab sessions, widows like me. Each of them had their own version of the same story, families who disappeared after the will was read, who only showed up for the inheritance, who didn't know how to grieve anything they hadn't personally gained from. We sat for hours, drinking coffee, laughing more than I expected. When one of them asked how I handled the silence after it all ended, I told her the truth. I made it mine. That night, I stood alone on the dock and looked out over the water, the same dock where Charles had once slipped and broken a rib, and insisted he was fine, and still grilled fish an hour later. I missed him. That wouldn't change. But the grief wasn't sharp anymore. It was something steady now, manageable. Before heading back to the house, I whispered something into the wind, just loud enough that I could hear it myself. They saw me as someone temporary, Charles, but I outlasted them all. Back at the main house, the mailbox was empty. For the first time in months, it didn't bring anxiety, just quiet. I went inside, turned on the radio, and started dinner. I set the table for one, and it was enough.